okay. Stay with me. We'll beat these
Good afternoon. I'm Alicia Connors Bauer, and I am your guest host on today's Pathways to Parenting Success. Our topic today is the resolution solution and self-acceptance. There are specific reasons why we fail at implementing our New Year's resolutions, and we're going to talk about some of those reasons and maybe some alternatives that you might want to consider as you're thinking about the new year. We have two guests with us today. Brooks Winter, who is a therapist, supervisor, and coach who cares deeply about us all living balanced and fulfilling lives. He believes that the best way to do that is to be clear with what matters most in life and strive to act on that daily. One of his favorite recent accomplishments has been to develop and deliver a therapeutic group treating anxiety with improv comedy. Our other guest today is Karen Eifert. Karen is a licensed clinical social worker and equine therapist. Karen has been working with adolescents, young adults, and their families for over 20 years. Welcome to both Karen and Brooks. So to get started, one of the things I wanted to throw out to you guys is it seems like as we approach the end of the current year and plan for the new year, one of the things that we commonly do is we start thinking about what kind of resolutions do we want to make. And resolutions, as we see in popular culture, is almost always about something that we want to change about ourselves. Which I find kind of fascinating in how did we get to that point where all of a sudden a transition into a new year means that there's something about ourselves that we think we need to fix. And so I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that. Maybe we'll start with Brooks.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. In preparing for this show, I did a little bit of research, and I saw that, wow, like resolutions, this practice of actually creating a resolution goes back to like Roman times when people would offer a resolution to do something in service of the god Janus, who's looking back, the two-headed god, looking back into the past and looking forward into the future. And so it's a long tradition that we're actually staying current with here. And I think it's a human need to sort of assess and get a sense of where are we, and are we on track? Is this moving, am I moving my life in a direction that I really am happy with? And to identify sort of, if not, well, how do I sort of move back into a direction that I would rather be heading in? So I think there's just some sense of when we approach these sort of thresholds of the new year or a major life event, there's just an opportunity to assess, like, well, how's it been going, and where do I want to go? Because otherwise we're just on autopilot, and, you know, if what's working, then autopilot is getting us where we want to go, then good. No need to change. And if not, then let's look at what we can do differently. And as we'll explore later in the show, that sometimes that's actually not so much about the outer behavior, but it's actually how we're actually treating ourselves.
Oh, great. Karen, is there anything you'd like to add?
You know, I think just to the, I think that pattern of that process of self-reflection, I think is one that, as you said, is historic, goes back a long ways, and comes from, I think, a very healthy place. We have birthdays, we have New Year's, we have new beginnings, and those are wonderful opportunities for change. And I think the timing in our current society with how the holidays have become. The other really interesting factor is that a lot of times the holidays are a time of higher levels of self-criticism and shame and comparing ourselves to, you know, how am I doing compared to my coworker who brought this fabulous cake to our holiday party, and I went to Costco and got a box of cookies, and, you know, or how are my kids comparing up with what they're bringing for the holidays, or, you know, what does my house look like when my, you know, in-laws come? And so I think that therein lies some of the challenging aspects of that in our current society, where the urge for a New Year's resolution can sometimes come more from a place of feeling unhappy with ourselves, as opposed to a place of wanting to develop and make changes that excite us.
You know, I mean, what you were saying about the holidays, it seems like not only is it a time for that we're a little more self-critical, but we're also a little more self-indulgent. to
That is correct.
And so it's like we go from this period of time where, we're focused on these indulgences, and then the New Year's hits, which is also a very indulgent time, and then we start thinking about these resolutions, and by comparison, the resolutions that we typically hear about are pretty Spartan in comparison. And so I wonder if going to those two extremes is part of the reason why sometimes resolutions don't take. Karen?
Yeah, I think that one of the things in going toward your New Year's resolution is actually to have some planning, some forethought and planning, and really have it be something that you're invested in. And I think of how often our resolutions have something to do with health, or organization, or communication, and all of those things are challenged over the holiday season. We tend to have so much going on that our organization goes down the tubes, and where it's sometimes more difficult to communicate with all the people around. And certainly there's that holiday platter in every office. And so I think that it really does bring the need for change to the forefront. And I think of the Lent, and kind of historically how people have had, Mardi Gras, that's before Lent, where people kind of celebrate and indulge and do things before things change and they kind of sober up. And it has a similar feel to that.
I mean, I think in some ways it's like you think, well, I'm going to have this one last indulgence before I change whatever it is, whether it's I change how I eat, whether it's I change my workouts or something like that. But I often wonder sometimes if that idea of we have to indulge first sets us up for failure in carrying that out. Brooks?
That's a good point. I think that if we are approaching our resolution in the sense that I'm going to make a 180-degree shift in my life direction because, boy, how I've been doing it, there's just something wrong with that, then I think we're setting ourselves up for some challenge, for sure. But I think in some ways, in Buddhists talk about that revulsion is the root of our freedom, in the sense that, like, once we kind of like play out that, like, wow, this sort of like indulgence is actually, it may be pleasurable for a moment, but it's not actually how I want to live. It's not what's actually forming the foundation of a good life. Then from that place, we can sort of look, well, what does form the foundation of a good life? And so when I'm thinking about resolutions, I want to hold that in the forefront. That it's not so much just about getting away from what it is we don't want, whether it's our concept of our body or a sense of a messy desk or whatnot, but really more like, what do I want to actually cultivate? What do I want to bring more of into my life?
Well, I think of the topic of all things in moderation, and I find that when we try to be too hard on ourselves, too rigid, too perfect, a lot of times we fall really short of what we're looking for, and I think there is some benefit in allowing ourselves a permissive indulgence. Having that day a week where you eat the desserts you don't usually eat the other days of the week, having that time where you're like, I am gonna sit in my flannel pajamas and watch Netflix all day today, or whatever. I think those things actually kind of rejuvenate us and help us weigh out, this is probably not actually how I want my life to be every day, but it really was nice while it lasted. And I think we can, with the right mindset, utilize these times to help motivate ourselves to do the things that feel good to us on a different level.
Well, and I think that there's a certain amount of maybe stress relief to having those days when you're not so rigid with yourself, like when you spend the whole entire day in your PJs. Mm-hmm. That seems particularly appealing in the winter.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about too is it can be sometimes really hard to just go from one thing to, like you said, Brooks, 180-degree change in behavior. But I think, for example, I'll use a physical example. If you were going to run a marathon, you wouldn't start tomorrow to try to cover that marathon distance, you would build up to that and you would take intervening steps. And so I wonder if there's a way that maybe we could shift our focus from that big change into what are those steps that might help us get there, or how we might break that into smaller steps to help us get to that change that we want to make.
Yeah, I mean, the research indicates that if we're going to be successful in our goals or our resolutions, we need to break those down into achievable steps. And part of that is really reckoning with where am I at now? Where am I starting from? Because, if I was already pretty good at running a 10K, well, then my marathon goals, I could start with maybe I'll do 15K by the end of January. Whereas for me, personally, if I'm getting to 8K by the end of January, I'd be pretty psyched. So really knowing sort of where we're at, and then if we have a big goal in mind for 2016, then it's going to do us a lot of good to break those down into small achievable successes that we will be able to check off the list. And also, as Karen mentioned, and as sort of our life tells us, that we need to be ready to face those lapses. When we're flagging in our commitment, we need to be able to just acknowledge that, accept where that's going to happen, that growth is maybe progressive, but it's not linear. And there are these periods where we sort of fall back into our old ways, and learning how to be kind and patient and caring with ourselves in those moments is actually probably the biggest key to having the long-term success.
So thinking about that, how would you help somebody work through that, understanding what are the small achievable steps that might help them, or even to recognize that, this is a great goal that you're taking on. How about, we break it into smaller pieces? What would you suggest somebody do to be able to incorporate that in whatever change they wanted to make? Karen?
Absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, going into it with some forethought and planning, not on December 31st at 5 p.m., sitting down and writing down 15 goals that are, things like I'm going to get organized or I'm going to get healthy or whatever, but to really have some thought about what the several really important things are for them, and lop off the rest of that, those 15 goals, get it down to a few really realistic, manageable, workable ones that they feel passionately about. Notice what things are the things on the goal that are the shoulds. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, this is what somebody else wants me to do. If they're not your goals, you're not going to meet them, and you may as well not set yourself up with that. And so, and then really, really helping to take something, a goal like get healthy, and break that down to, and what healthy means to you. Are you saying you want to have more stamina for your workday? Are you saying you want to lose weight? Are you wanting to say that you're eating more organic, healthy, clean food? To help them really break those pieces down and into things that they can measure, that they can give themselves credit for when they've made progress.
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, because when you were saying that and giving some examples of, I'd like to be healthier, well, really, what does that mean? And I think that what does that mean to you is the really important piece. Because one of the things that you talked a little bit about, Brooks, was this idea of self-acceptance. And I think that maybe related to what Karen was talking about, the terms of what healthy means to you, as well as your journey towards health, even if you have those setbacks, and how you embrace this idea of accepting the process. And so what would you advise people to do as they're going through this journey?
Well, following up on what Karen was saying, that, really discriminating between the shoulds and the wants. One thing that I work with clients is, when there's I should be healthier. Well, I choose to be healthy, or I would like to be healthier. It's a very different stance, and it's a very different approach to our goals. And so in terms of sort of holding the big picture in mind, and being able to fortify us when we're flagging, and where do we look when our motivation is sort of in the basement, I'm really interested in exploring deeply with people why the goals that they set for themselves are important. What matters about that? And we get into this terrain of, core values or guiding principles. And from that perspective, the goals can be quite flexible, and you can be adaptable or adaptive to sort of changing situations or challenges that emerge that were unforeseen when you first set the goal, as long as you have a sense of like, well, this matters because it's about being healthy so that I can be the kind of parent that I want, so that I can do the recreational activities that I would like to do for a long time. You have a sense of purpose that transcends the specific goal, that then can allow you to kind of shift tack if you sort of come across some unexpected challenges. I think that's really important. Otherwise, we could be operating on this sense of like, well, if I don't do this, then I'll just end up as a failure, in which case we're sort of being driven by our shoulds as opposed to being in the driver's seat from a place of real clarity of why it matters.
I think that's a really important point because it has to mean something to you, as well as I like that part what you were talking about in terms of what your core values are, as opposed to maybe somebody else's expectations of how you should engage in your life, because that's really what it's about, is how you engage in your life. One of the things that you touched on a little bit was we've talked about sort of external kind of things, I guess, like health or maybe getting organized or communication. I'm wondering a little bit about, you touched on about being a better parent. Sometimes that can be a little tricky to kind of measure, but you hear that come up. I'd like to have better communication with my kids. I'd like to improve my relationship. And sometimes those are really intangible things to kind of measure. How would you, I guess, incorporate something like that's big and broad, like I want to be a better parent, into this sort of framework that we've been uncovering through this conversation? Karen.
Yeah, I think it goes back really, really well to what Brooks was talking about around what your values are. What is your value around how you want your relationship with your child to be? What's your value around how you want your time with them to be? And there's a whole list of shoulds. My favorite thing that's come out this holiday was Mothers Against Shelf Elves. And this whole idea of this, which I think shelf elves are adorable, but the whole idea that the moms or the parents have to put this shelf elf in a different location every day and have something funny and creative going on for every day leading up to Christmas. And how many moms are like, I'm done with a shelf elf. I am done with that expectation. And I have seen so many moms just be able to relate to that so heavily. And, you know, there are all those things that society or other peers think we should be doing, but are they really our priorities? Is that your thing? Is that where you shine with your child? Or are you able to be really a comfort to your child? Are you able to really be their support system, their cheerleader? Are you that like rock for them? Are you someone who really helps them with their homework? Are you a good provider? To really be looking at your area of what's important to you as opposed to what other people think you should be doing or you think other people think you should be doing. Yeah.
Brooks?
Yeah, Mothers Against Shelf Elves. I totally relate to that. And in response to your question, I think that when we have the word better, it can be quite problematic in the sense that we often may be responding to these sort of unexamined expectations and the fantasy that if we were a better parent, then our kids would look a certain way and our household would be a certain way and there wouldn't be strife and we could all go to the game and have a great time and eat popcorn and they're going to, my kids are going to come to me to confide and all that stuff. And I think that's a really, it's tough to swallow that in the face of reality. And really what we have control of is at best our behavior and how do we choose what to do and how do we choose to respond to the situations that show up in our life and relate then to our kids. So a better parent for each parent is going to look differently. So I'm curious about, if you were a better parent, what qualities would be guiding your actions? How would you actually be reflecting on the situations that are showing up day after day that are demanding your response? Because we have to respond to our kids, we have to respond to situations, and there's so many competing priorities, And we can't address every role that we play in our life to 100% all the time. We have to relax and recognize that we have limited resources and unlimited intentions. And with that, how am I going to spend my time? How am I going to spend my energy? How am I going to consider the different situations that I'm needing to respond to? And so I really ask people about, well, what does a good parent in your world, what guides them? And from that place, then, we assess our own list of infinite possible responses, and then choose from there.
I mean, it seems like part of it is we have to embrace the messiness. That we are not perfect individuals, so we're not going to be the perfect parent or the perfect whatever, that there is an inherent messiness in the lives that we live. And sometimes we forget that we have to be able to embrace that messiness. And I think that there's a little bit of pressure that comes with this idea of New Year's resolutions, that you have to come up with something. You have to have a resolution for this, or it's that should idea again. It's maybe a societal expectation as opposed to something that your own. So how do you balance that idea of accepting self-acceptance and accepting yourself as you are? Because maybe that's in a place you want to be, as opposed to going out and creating a resolution that isn't really meaningful to you. Mm-hmm. Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that self-acceptance process is it's a lifelong process for most of us, and there's a lot of amazing work to be done there. And I think the more you can accept yourself and what you bring to the table as a parent, the more you'll be able to shine in what you do and your own expression of yourself. I think the more we try to put someone else's shoes on and become them, and put on other people's clothing that doesn't fit and try to be them, the less we are bringing what we have to the table. And so to help remember that we're the people that you're the person that gave birth to your child. You're the parent that they have in this world, and so the best you can do is bring forth what you have as their parent. I find over and over again that making change for what we want in our lives and what we really are passionate about goes so much more smoothly and is so much more successful when we come from a position of just wanting to enhance our lives and from a place of help as opposed to a place of self-criticism. And I think there's a real old message in our society that if you have the tough coach that just kicks your butt and makes you do stuff, that you're going to rise to the occasion. And some personalities are able to do that, but do a lot better with a cheerleader that is going to really help you remember your strengths, help you remember what you're capable of, and be there for you, cheering you on, versus a heckler or a critic. And very often we end up taking on our own heckler role and our own critic role. And I think the more we can exercise self-acceptance, appreciate what we bring to the table and who we are, the more energy we have to put into achieving those goals and making change for the good.
Brooks.
Yeah, there's a real paradox to self-acceptance, and with regards to the sort of acceptance and change dialectic, in that I think a lot of people, as Karen mentioned, they sort of fear that if we're not cracking the whip on ourselves, if we're not sort of pushing ourselves with this critical voice pointing out all of our flaws, well, then we're just going to sort of be as we are for the rest of our lives, and that's just unacceptable. And that's a really painful place to be. And I've seen a lot of people who, operating from that sort of tough, critical coach mentality, achieve a lot of goals and still be deeply unsatisfied. They just keep raising the bar or keep moving the goalposts. And so there's this sort of paradox that I've seen when the more we actually resolve to accept ourselves as we are, the more flexible we become in terms of engaging our lives in the way that we'd like to. That there's actually more bandwidth available to meet the challenges with greater clarity and greater purpose, so that our actions become more effective and we actually become a little bit more peaceful, which is, I think, in some ways, ultimately what a lot of people are looking for. Is we're looking for a sense of belonging in ourselves, a sense of connection with others, and just a basic sense of self-worth that says, this is okay. I don't need to be somebody different to then be okay. And so I think a great resolution is to cultivate self-acceptance, which is an interesting resolution, right?
It is very interesting because it also seems to me that there's an element of this idea of that we focus on our strengths, that we focus on what we're good at and what makes us uniquely us as an individual, as opposed to what makes us fit in better in some circumstance that we might not fit into. We have just a few more minutes left, and what I wanted to do is offer each of you the opportunity, if there's anything that you haven't had a chance to say that you would like to share with our audience today, and I'll start with Karen.
Yeah, I think my final thought is on resilience. I think that we have a tendency to set a big goal, fall short one weekend, and then kind of let it drop off. And I think Alcoholics Anonymous in the 12-step program bring the concept of one day at a time, and I think the more we can approach our resolutions from an idea of today I'm going to give it my best, and tomorrow I might not do that well with it, but today I've got it, and to really practice that idea of I may slide on this, but I can get back on track. And I think the more we prove that to ourselves, that we're able to get back on track after we have a little break, the more we start trusting ourselves that we can handle change, we can make change. So cultivating resilience is, I think, a huge piece of successful New Year's resolutions.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Brooks?
I think that the process of New Year's resolution, of looking back over where we've been and looking ahead at where we're wanting to go, is an incredibly valuable one. And I encourage everybody to do it. And in doing so, really reflect on what deeply matters to me personally. What qualities and attributes am I really looking to cultivate more of, to bring out more of that goodness in my heart and in my mind that I want to share with the world? What kind of person would I choose to be in difficult moments, in joyful moments, and really sort of use what you come up with in that assessment as the guideposts of success. And you can then create goals from that.
Great. It sounds like, based on our conversation today, that there's a couple key elements that we should look for when we're creating resolutions. One being this idea of self-reflection and really understanding ourselves and why we want to make this effort. And then connecting that to our core values, our core sense of who we are, focusing on our strengths and how our strengths will help whatever challenge we're trying to make, and as well as enhancing our own personal resilience. And then I think the other piece that was really, really important that you talked about at the beginning of the show is silencing our inner self-critic. Because I think that sometimes we can be our worst critic, and that doesn't help us if one of the things we're trying to do is make a shift in our lives, whether it's a small change or something that we think, as you said earlier, will help enhance our everyday life. That's some of the things that I heard in our conversation today. So I hope that was helpful to you all watching. And I just wanted to let you know that if you're interested in any additional television shows or the webinars or in-person talks, you can access all of those by going to the website for boulderpsychologicalservices.com. All of the upcoming shows and events will be posted on the website. I thank my guests today, Brooks Witter and Karen Eifert, for their advice and their insight into resolutions. I would also like to thank Boulder Psychological Services and the Boulder Valley School District for allowing the time and the space for this show to continue. That's all the time we have for today, so I'd like to thank you and to thank our additional sponsors for supporting this program.
And now the planet's done its bowing down. and soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow, and I love my baby, and we've miles to go. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Be with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? So wait a while, winter time.